So welcome to today's session about effective listening. If you've been here before, if you've not been here before, perhaps I should say, the previous sessions we've talked about conversation needing relationship. We've talked about relationship being an important entity that needs two-way commitment. And conversation and relationship, we talked about those last time because they underpin any kind of communication. You have to consider both. And of course, effective listening is part of effective communication. So relationship is going to come into this, but perhaps we won't emphasize it as much as we have done previously. Just know that it's aware, that it's there, and we might touch on it. So my first question to get us all thinking is, what does it feel like not to be heard? So you're welcome to write in the chat box, but there's so few of us, perhaps you'd like to unmute and then share with us what it feels like. I can certainly relate lots of examples where people have hardly looked at me when I've been speaking to them. At work, they hardly look up from their computer. I can remember standing in a corridor talking to a male colleague, and if a female colleague walked behind me, his eyes would follow her rather than look at me. So, which is quite an amusing example. So, what examples have you got, and what does it actually feel like? Any thoughts? I'm going to pick on somebody if.
Usually feels very, very frustrating and distracting, especially when you have like the example you just gave, where you're talking to a male colleague and you probably were there for a specific reason, probably to get across a specific message or follow up with a previous conversation, and then when they are distracted, it causes you to sometimes lose your flow of thoughts, especially if you're in the middle of delivering a specific message. But the bottom line is frustration.
Yeah, frustration. Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts about feelings when you're not being heard? I would say for me, it's like not being important, feeling important. It's like, oh, someone else is more important than me, kind of thing. So I interrupt.
It's like, what am I doing here? If I'm not being listened to, what am I doing here? What's the point?
Yeah, do I matter at all? Yeah, exactly. So, any other comments? Okay, so it can be low frustration, but actually, if we are making a point to speaking to someone and they're not responding in any way, it can be on the high scale, frustration. And as Joseph says, it can put us off what we're actually trying to do. So that's great. So what we need to do then is think about our culture and what kind of listening we want to have in our team. So I'm going to refer back to a webinar I did for William in July. We were really targeting agile coaches and being authentic with our listening. We really got into some detail about that. I'm not going to get into that detail today, but this is the soft skills model I keep showing. It's what I rely on. 3 focuses at foci of attention. So the self, and so we ourselves have to be prepared to listen when someone else is speaking, but also when someone else is speaking, we have to think about our listening and show that we're listening. So we're just going to stick with those 2 foci of attention today. That one focuses on ourselves and being prepared to listen, but also on the other person, because we have to show that we're listening to them. So we're going to try and go with those two attentions, let's say. So how do we measure good listening? So here's three examples, right? So in presentations, which we talked about last week, we can probably measure it in engagement, and good speakers are always asking people to put up their hands or ask rhetorical questions. All right, so you can get a response, you can have a feeling if people are listening. In meetings, it gets a little bit more difficult, especially if people have got laptops in the room. But maybe you can measure it with getting through the agenda on time. Maybe you can measure how many people actually contributed in the session. In social media environments, obviously, not always verbal, is it? But same idea, you know, you can measure certain things if you get responses because you're measuring likes and you measure comments. So again, in a verbal scenario, it's the same thing. You're looking for that engagement. So if you can think about some ways of measuring good listening, like having everyone's laptop off, you know, is that allowed? Have you got permission to do that in a team meeting or not? My encouragement today is we need to set intention for good listening. All right, so start with the end in mind. Mr. Covey always says, so if we want to listen well, we need to have an intention that we're going to listen well. And we need to have an idea of how we know that the listening is going to be good. So how are we actually going to measure it? So I'd really be interested to know, what is your listening culture like? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think everyone is in your team? And how do you think you might influence it? So do you believe you can influence the listening in the team by modeling good listening yourself? But would anyone like to comment on how challenging this setting intention for good listening can be?
Yes, I can go, Shirley.
Okay.
Well, I once worked in a place that when we go for meetings, everybody would just stay quiet. No one would make any contribution. No one would say anything. And it used to be quite a little frustrating until it was intentioned that part of performance management would involve, one of the criteria would be participation during team meetings. And all of a sudden, people started talking up. People started asking questions. People started making comments. Whether that was real or not, but it definitely did increase engagement because it was part of performance appraisal. So that was one strategy that was used that increased participation, obviously, indirectly listening culture in the organization.
Okay. So that's great. We can influence it then by setting rules, is what you're saying.
Yes, that's what happened. Yeah, setting rules. Yeah,
setting
you have to contributing in meetings as part of the culture for measuring performance or appraisal. So people have to contribute. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know if that actually happened easily. You know, did people need to get used to that, or was it like a switch and that's an expectation? So now I've got permission. I can just do it now.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Abby.
Yeah, it happened sometimes in my place of work that the rules was said that usually we go into meetings with our laptops and everything, but then we have a projector where everybody has to like concentrate on the screen rather than having to open your own laptop and doing personal stuff, or maybe, you know, being diverted and all that. And at some point we agree at the same that, okay, we're not coming into the meetings with laptops any longer, and it reduces the bit, yeah, and everybody's focusing on the shared screen, right? And at the end of the day, we have issues with people looking into their phone from time to time, which causes distraction as well. So that was another set rule to say no more phones in meetings. So we are able to give, and it really did work. Yeah, it worked.
Great. So do you think that's the leader setting? Go on. Someone else wants to say something?
Yeah, Shirley, that's me.
Okay, Wale.
Yeah, so I also have, with regards to my team, we've once experienced that kind of challenge where people don't listen when you're talking, especially in meeting. Either you get phone interruption or someone is working on a computer. So what we did to influence that culture was to have a social contract as a team,
Yeah.
where we said that if anyone come with a laptop or if you pick a call in the meeting, then you have to pay these amounts, and you pay the amount. The team use the amount to buy a pizza and they enjoy
Okay.
it. So
Okay.
it's a form of a social contract, and I think it worked because
Yeah.
we're very cautious. Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. And probably with a social contract, you've had everyone contribute to that. You didn't just, it wasn't like a rule or a law that the leader set down. There was actually some discussion about it, was there?
That was it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you did discuss it rather than just say it's going to work like this.
Exactly. It was a team decision.
Yeah.
Like, guys, you really should we really go this way? No. Okay, so what's the solution? And that was what came out of the team discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's what I like to hear, that actually, instead of the leader laying rules down, actually people are contributing to it. They're more likely to engage with some intentions if they've actually had a chance to set those intentions or influence those intentions. Because we're all adults, we all like to have a little bit of say in our futures. So yeah, really good that there's some team discussion. Okay. So what I'd like to get to now in our main discussion is, when someone else is speaking, what are we actually doing in ourselves? So if you can imagine that you're listening to someone else, how do you actually prepare yourself to listen on what is going on in your head, and then what is going on in your mind in consideration of somebody else when they're speaking. So let's start with our personal intention. So clearly we've got to set an intention to listen, but what does that actually mean? Can anyone describe what it's like to actually decide, okay, I'm going to listen now? I mean, as a coach, I have to prepare myself quite well to go into a coaching session. I would say, my listening is so much better when I'm in a coaching session than it is outside when I'm just talking to people. So my mind is quite often on other things until I make a decision that I'm going to be present and fully listening. So what do other people do to get themselves ready to listen? What actually happens?
I think for me, if I get a question, well, for me, it's depending on how interesting what the other party is telling me is.
Mm.
And the intro is very necessary to let me know how valuable that discussion would be to me. I think
Okay.
that would inform my eagerness to listen carefully to what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
I've been,
go for it, Ewan.
I think I'll agree with Wale to some extent because your ability to connect with what is being said will ultimately arouse your interest to listen keenly and attentively. So if you're sitting in a meeting and they have different agenda, and maybe they say this agenda is to be carried, is Shirley who's going to be anchoring that agenda, that particular agenda item. Of course, when it comes to that item, you will pay more attention to that because you're going to be anchoring it. And if other areas are not of interest to you, but you have to be in the meeting, honestly speaking, you would not necessarily give it your 100% attention. So I think that interest and connection, relation between you and that item is what makes you listen more. Because if you
Yeah.
don't find it of value to you, you would not really listen to it.
Okay. So we're kind of all drifting around looking for interesting stuff then, and as soon as we lock on to something interesting, then that's the moment where we block out everything else and say, right, I'm listening to this now.
I guess so. Something that's of value to you, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
That's what for me.
So do you think you're 10 out of 10 on attention when it's interesting?
I wouldn't say 10 out of 10. I would say maybe 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you have to do to get that attention, everybody? So yeah, we all have to decide. Then we have to kind of lock in, because here's something interesting, so we're going to lock in and listen, get our ears pinned back and listen to it, get our mind focused. Is there anything else we have to do?
Typically for me, I rid myself of any kind of distraction. So if I'm going into a meeting, for instance, anything that could possibly be a distraction, and usually I have my day planned out well. So my cell phone starts with my cell phone. We all know that's an appendage everybody has grown. So I sort of put it on vibrate, and not, if I can, not even have it on me. Probably have it on, my documents on there on the side, so it doesn't bother me. And then I go in there with an open mind. Usually I have a pen and I have a paper to be able to take notes, because I want to engage that person, the speaker. And part of why I want to engage that speaker is twofold: to let them know that the message got across, and to clarify whatever points they may have made, so we can all be on the same page, because communication is a two-way stream. Whoever is delivering it and whoever is receiving it, there has to be that understanding from both parties. So to summarize again, I rid myself of all distractions so I can focus.
Brilliant. Okay, so we really have to be determined to prepare, don't we? And I love the fact that you said you've got an open mind. I think that's really important for everybody to understand. You really do need to block everything out and be open to what's going on here in order to have that engagement with the other person. So brilliant. Okay, so let's shift our attention to the other person now. What considerations do we have to have for this other person? So
Shirley, just a quick question, Shirley.
Yeah, go, Ewan. Yep.
Now, again, it depends on the meeting, the agenda, and whether I have a choice in attending it or not. There are some meetings that are mandatory, okay? You've got to be there because maybe everybody has to be there. In those sort of meetings, you don't have an option, even though you may not find value in it. So you just go because you got to be there, because you know that it doesn't connect to you, it doesn't really relate to you, but because it's just an organizational expectation for you to be there. However, if you had a choice, you wouldn't be there. Like, now is my choice to be here because I feel I'm going to get value out of this.
Yeah.
Other people may not be here because they may not find value in it. So I think it's just to bring that perspective in, that choice is quite important to know if you have a choice or not.
Yeah, I agree. And this comes back to culture. So it's a really good point, Ewan. Thank you. It is about the culture. So, is it acceptable culture for everybody that they have to go to meetings that they're not contributing to? And what level of listening is expected? It's a bit like Way's social contract about the way meetings are dealt with, or way the team deals with one another. There's a possibility of discussing these meetings that you have to go to, because if it's a waste of people's time, or they're not listening because it's not interesting, I think that's worth some consideration and discussion. I recognize it's challenging when you're given, instruction to go, which obviously if you're given instruction, you have to go. But it is about asking, well, what attention do I have to give? And can I look at my laptop at the same time? At what points of the agenda do I actually have to listen? And why am I listening to all of it? I think there's really good questions that could be asked. If it's just one meeting that you're asked to go to, it doesn't matter. But if it's happening over and over again, it starts to become frustrating to people. And therefore, you know, the team culture isn't working as well as it might be. So is that a fair answer, Yun? Or am I living in an idealistic world?
I guess to a very large extent, you've answered the question, but I think if it's something that is mandatory that you have to be there, then I think is it the responsibility of the speaker to be able to hook on the audience by using a hooker, something that will just ignite the listener's attention to hook them on something. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, you know, if it's a presentation, then there probably is some feedback that you can give, and maybe over a period of time, you know, the feedback will get back. You have to be honest with your feedback though. So, you know, constructive feedback to say how it would have been better, or, you know, what would have made it more interesting, that sort of thing. But yeah, I agree, it's challenging, but within this wrapper of culture, we're trying to build a culture that we all want. So, you know, we need to challenge what the listening culture is expected to be. I think that's where I'm at. So let's just move on to, because obviously we've got quite time. So let's just move on to thinking about the intentions for others. So if someone else is speaking and we're listening to them and engaging, let's go with a one-to-one scenario. What's important for us to do you think? I mean, for example, I always have to remember to smile, otherwise I get really serious because I'm thinking all the time. Well, he smiles really easily, but I have to remember to do that. So what about other things? And I'm not doing the smiling for myself, I'm doing the smiling for the other person. So that it looks like I'm, you know, pleased to be listening to them. So what else might you do?
I think some nodding, so non-verbal clues will be okay. Like it's not like, yeah, I'm listening, something like that.
Yeah.
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 Or some sound like yeah. I think that can really help. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of non-verbal stuff as well. Yeah, as well, can't it? The nodding is really, you know, silent verbal stuff. Yeah. That's good. Anything else?
I guess show interest as well, you know, to make the other person feel valued and comfortable, you know, because sometimes in a very subtle way, arrogance can set in, or even if the person is saying something that doesn't make much sense, you might, by just shutting off, you know, you just don't encourage the person because you don't even know the other person. I've had to deal with a lot of people that probably have had issues with processing speed and things like that, and they struggle to get their points across, and we just have to be patient. So you don't just use the body language that indicates that they should hurry up, they should hurry up, they should hurry up, you know. Yeah. So those sort of things helps the other person to feel comfortable and finally express themselves. And over a period of time, they get better and better.
Okay, great examples. And yes, I'm going to show you a slide now. I'm going to move on and show you slides, because I think this area is the place that we can really grow our skills. All right, so thinking about the other person so that they feel heard and engaged with, and people are patient with them in those kind of pace situations. You know, giving people silence and space is really, really important. So really good point. So I'm going to move across back to my picture. So we've talked about us being prepared to listen, to really give focused attention, be open mind, curious as well, you know, willing to actually engage. And then this creating the feeling of other people being heard. There's lots of ways of doing this. And, you know, this is where we can, as I say, grow our skills. But fundamentally, we're trying to create this kind of positive regard for the other person. So this is where the relationship comes in. You know, we're trying to create rapport and that really good relationship and connection with people, and reflecting back what they've said is one of the ways that we can really verbally engage. So rather than ask a question, observing what they've said first and then asking a question can be nice to hear, because it reinforces that you're both on the same page before that question comes in. And it can make any questions land much more nicely. I've talked about smiling, so it's emotional, and there's also, you know, noticing feelings between you, but we can't really cover that today. But I did cover some of that on the July webinar in more detail. I'm sure William's got a link to that somewhere. So I wanted to challenge us for the future to really home in on this observation and reflecting back to people. And I thought it might be good to do a little practice. So if by talking, so if we all had a go at talking and then following each other to speak, thinking about this observation. So if I said, for example, the best game in the world is tennis, I believe, because I'm really good at it, because it's, you know, it's been around a long time, there's Wimbledon, and gave you a whole host of reasons for it. How would you follow that if you were to say your best game? So if I pick on Wally, if you'd be so kind. So if let me just say again, the best game in the world is tennis, Wally, because you can learn, you can play it from a small age, you can play it, you can play a version called table tennis, you can play a version called paddle in Spain, you know, you can even play it with your hand with a tennis ball. You know, it's brilliant for getting hand-eye coordination. If you were to respond to that, Wally, what would you say?
That's I didn't get a question really clearly.
Okay, so if we're having a social conversation and I actually said, right, the best game in the world is tennis, how would you respond to that if we were in a social gathering?
Oh, okay. I think I'm getting it now. If I get it well, you're saying my best game that I loved when you were in my childhood was tennis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, yeah, maybe something like, okay, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah. So for me to hear that, oh, that sounds interesting, is affirmation of what I've just said is been heard by you. So I'm feeling comfortable that I've made some kind of social connection. You're not, you know, you're not just coming straight in with, oh no, Shirley, it's a so-and-so game. All right. Right. So why don't you have a go at answering that question, Wally, and then we'll get someone else to answer. So can you say a statement, the best game in the world is?
Okay, so the best game in the world is football, soccer.
Because? Because
it's fun and boys like playing soccer.
Okay. So Ewan, would you like to follow that?
I think probably fair enough. Yeah, that's fair enough, because, you know, boys like to play soccer majority of the time. But again, you have girls who like soccer as well. Great.
If you'd said "and" instead of the "but," that would have been even better.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because it just sounded slightly negative, but it did respond to Wally very well. So really good. Okay. So Ewan, would you like to say the same sentence or a similar sentence for someone else to follow? So we're all around the table, right, having a conversation at the minute.
The best game in the world is squash, because in that little space of enclosure, you have to make it your home by having excellent response skills and hand, eye, leg movement coordination, and It's a very competitive game. And if you spend just, I tell you, just 5 minutes, it's like you worked out for 30 minutes.
Okay. All right. So would anyone else like to follow that? Abby?
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I don't know much about Scotch, and I would like to know more about it because to improve my coordination. So that would be good to learn.
Excellent. Okay. So I think you're all getting the idea now. So this bit of observation, of reflection back of what you've heard in a nice way with a nice smile is a really good way of communicating. So, and more important when you've got technical subjects, of course, to actually demonstrate that you've understood. It's a bit easier with in social circumstances. So technical stuff can be more important to actually engage people by reflecting back. So my question is, do you accept the challenge? That was the idea today. So I'll leave you to think about that, and then we'll just wrap it up with any questions. And if you'd like to say what's been useful or anything else you think I should have said, or anything else you need for improving your listening, let me know. So, anyone not accept the challenge?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Shirley, can you hear me, please?
Which one? Who's that? Is that Wally?
This is Wally, yeah, this is Wally.
Yeah.
So my question is with regards to the challenge of the sports question or saying, is it okay to give just an affirmative answer, or you need to add something to keep the conversation engaging?
Well, conversation is normally swapping from one to the other. So I would say a question does enable that conversation to continue. But you may be with a talkative person, and so you don't need to ask a question, because if you give them an affirmation, they might just carry on. So I think it depends. I'm sure your natural judgment would come in. My point today is really think about the observation before the question, because it gives you a chance to for you to connect with the other person a little bit more and make sure you're both on the same page. And the question is probably going to land better, and you're probably going to ask a better question, in fact, because you've given yourself that little bit of time to say something positive and show what's in your mind as a result of the other person speaking. The questions tend to come more easily. They tend to be shorter after you've done that observation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fantastic answer. That's great.
Thanks.
Hi, Shirley. Yeah, this is Abby.
Hi, Abby.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you asked me to respond to that, I was going to say, because I don't think it's all good to respond positively all the time. When I mean positively, as in case you disagree or you share a different view, like I was going to say, well, maybe because I don't know if badminton is something that ladies play, but I like basketball because it's both female and male. How about responding in that tone? Is that okay?
I think it's great. I love people who challenge, so I'm very with the challengers. But because I'm a challenger, I have quite a reputation of being direct and probably rude to some people because they're not used to directness. And it can come across as cut and thrust if you respond so directly straight away. That's why the reflecting something back is a softening thing, enables you to go in with your challenge. So I would just encourage a little bit of practicing of the reflecting back. So highlight what you thought was important from what they said, and then say your bit about why you like your thing, because it's different to that particular thing. So it demonstrates you're listening and you're connecting with the person. And I think it will probably soften your challenge a little bit. So instead of being, I don't know, I mean, it's fine. I'm shaking my shoulders now. But so it will just soften what you're saying, because rather than being completely hard, it will just be nicely challenging. You know, well, how about this then? Kind of thing. It's hard to explain. You need to kind of practice it and see how you feel in your body and what your body's doing. But it's, you know, the other person takes a lot in from our non-verbal communication. So anything we can do to soften will help the connection.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And don't stop challenging, because I think we all need to challenge. All followers need to challenge as well as leaders, right? So, yeah, up the challenging.
Yeah, yes, Shirley.
Yes, you
Again, another angle could be to look at or consider is to be sensitive sometimes, because the person you're talking to or having a conversation with, you don't know their situation at that point in time.
Yeah.
And it's just good to be sensitive, because maybe they're going through grief or some loss, or they come from a country that has just been bombed by some people somewhere. They've just lost their entire homeland. So some comments you could make out of ignorance could just be a trigger to some emotional roller coaster. So it's good to be sensitive too, you know, when you read the situation before one can make some sort of comments.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is why relationship is so important. You know, there's lots of things you can't say until you've up the relationship. So, and that means you have to know about other people. You know, you can really only have a social conversation with people before you've got to know them a little bit. That's why, you know, that's where we start, isn't it? When we first meet somebody, we smile at them, and then we talk about everyday stuff to get to know them. It takes a while for us to really understand somebody. So yeah, that's why there's kind of social etiquette. And then in a work team, probably you do get to know people quite well, and you start to ask more personal questions about their situation, so you start to understand. But I agree, you know, there is a certain amount of observation you have to do in case they've just had a row with their wife that morning or whatever, you know, or you've just had some kind of medical diagnosis and not feel great. You know, there's always something to show that they're not in the mood for talking. So I agree. That's one of the reasons we have to have an open mind and full attention, because then we can notice those sorts of things. We're not listening just for our benefit. You know, we are listening because we want a connection with the other person as well, and we, you know, want a good relationship with them. Is that answering the question?
Well, it was just a comment and contribution. Yeah,
really valuable. And you know, that is keeping the skills up to a really high level. But first and foremost, we've got to make ourselves be prepared to give attention to people so that we notice. Okay.
I would like to ask a question, please, because some of us, like the question Abby has, some of us are quite direct in the way we talk. So somebody like me, sometimes I'm very direct, and you may sound very rude to people that doesn't really quite understand. So how can I answer that question, challenging people in a nice way? You understand what I mean?
Well, this is really interesting. I've got a webinar planned for later in the series called Intentions for a Relationship. And it's sitting there on the outside of my soft skill model, really important. So having conversations with people about relationship, I think, is where we need to go, because you're right, not everybody can take our style, but our style is who we are. So somebody else is allowed to have their style, but also they're allowed to not like our style. So when two styles come together, there needs to be some negotiation on how we can treat each other. So, you know, in a team, we're not all the same, and we certainly don't want people to be all the same, because that might clamp our innovation capability. But somehow we have to kind of work together so we can all get on and work effectively. So if you're brave, I would suggest you start having conversations with people, but also when you're in conversation, keep up your attention. So try harder at being attentive to the other person and really notice if they're flinching or looking like they don't want, or looking or sounding like they're uncomfortable with you, and see if you can have a conversation about styles. I know it sounds scary, but I think, you know, the idea of social contract that Wally was talking about earlier, you start to have conversations like this in a team, I think, if you're all going to gel well. So if you're not used to it, you know, just try it with friends and people you already have a relationship with first. Have a conversation. You know, how do they find you? And I mean, I've personal experience, you know, I've always 50-50, people love me or hate me, you know, so I had that reputation at work. So, but I can be docile in other situations. So I know that softness is there. It's just, when do I want to use the softness and when do I want to use my directness? And that, you know, it's not, you have to make up your mind in every situation. It's just, but you probably do have that capability of varying. It's just how much do you want to vary it, and when is it important to relax, and when is it important to keep the challenge.
Sorry, Shirley, honestly, I didn't mean to say anything again, because I know, but just,
Okay.
But I think there are some things in life that we have to be direct, and if need be, possibly heavy-handed on. There's some things, especially when it comes to matters pertaining to health and safety.
Yeah.
And when it comes to things pertaining to what we call maybe safeguarding. Those are very, very serious issues that sometimes we don't need to be nice about it. You know, if someone's health and safety is at stake, we need to address it straight away, and if need be, stress it, and if need be, go an extra length.
Yeah.
But again, that's because of the nature of the situation is health and safety and safeguarding. Those are issues that we don't have to try to be nice about it.
Well, I think there's no harm in being nice about it. That's just the way it is. That's the social expectations, right? We're going to adhere to health and safety. That's the way it is. But you can still say it nicely, I think. It's what you're saying is, if someone doesn't agree with that, you're going to actually say that's a law, that's a rule. I totally agree with that. But you know, if it's not that absolute rule, I'm really more talking about situations which are a little bit more difficult to decide upon. You know, do we go with our natural habit to be challenging, which I often do? So I'm responding to, I think it was Abby or somebody else, that's kind of probably naturally that way. That's more of a kind of identity. On when do we actually moderate that? Because actually it would improve relationships with people and get people on board a lot more. If I'm needing to dictate something for the benefit of the team, then I'm going to be direct. But if I'm trying to engage people, I'm going to be softer. So I think it comes down to, you know, what's the intention here? And every conversation is different. What's the intention? What's important about this relationship? Do I want to be supportive to someone else in this particular situation? If I was in a status meeting trying to get information about status, I probably would be quite soft and engaging in order to get more information. As soon as I'm tough and direct or critical, they're probably going to clam up and I'm not going to get the information that I want. So I have to be smart, intelligent from experience on what works when. But all of this comes from practicing, experimenting, and seeing what works for us. You know, there's no black and white rule for any human skill in my book. So until you get a community that sets rules for things and sets boundaries, yeah, okay, we can all live with the boundaries. It's where things are not set in stone that we have to make our own decisions. So I hope I can encourage you to be challenging when you need to be challenging and not challenging when you don't need to be challenging. So, you know, use the flexibility of all your skills and the range of skills. And that's when your soft skills ability will go up. So anything else anyone wants to say? Because I'm conscious of having been quite opinionated, and you're all allowed to have opinions too. I'm not saying I'm right. As a coach, I quite often say, please allow me to be wrong. You know, making judgments of others can always be wrong. So, Welly, would you like to wrap up if there's no more questions? We've had a really good set of questions. So I'm very happy about the engagement with everyone, the discussion we've had. Really, really good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Shirley. I think this is very, very good session. Interesting. Thank you for the new challenge. And thank you everyone for joining. Our next session is on Monday with Eric Amma Godwin on agile testing and automation. So please, let's try and make it. And thank you. Let's have a great day.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Shirley.
Shirley.
Thanks, Wally. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.